Missouri, Memphis. I think Blaine put it best. Whatever day that was on the morning report, he can remind me in the comments. But how does Missouri handle success? That is what this comes down to, because this is one of those games that I've said this before, and probably this week on the show at some point. It's one thing to beat Kansas State. It's another thing to lose to Memphis, because one all of a sudden gets kind of canceled out in terms of the momentum and everything you built last week. If you come out and lose this game, because everyone's already, myself included, I apologize for being in on the hype train here, but the 5-0 start is looking pretty right now. And that's what people think. They beat Memphis, they go beat Vanderbilt, and they got LSU 5-0, biggest game in the history of Missouri football or something. I don't know. I know there were some big ones back in the day when Kansas were ranked, 1-2 or whatever it was years ago. But yeah, so it's a very important game. There's no other way to put it for Missouri. Just as the Kansas State game was important, you got that win. Now it's, can you keep this thing going? Memphis, Chris, kind of doing a little scouting on them. Watch the game against Navy. They didn't look great against Navy. And that's a Navy program that's kind of rebuilding a little bit. But they have, beat Bethune, took them 56-14, beat Arkansas 37-3. And so, Hennigan's there, and this is just one of those that, like, you want to see Missouri come out and kind of handle what they did last week. And I'm very curious to see how they play, because this is a game you can lose. That's how we put it sometimes, right? Like, this is not one of those teams just come in and sleepwalk and beat by 2 touchdowns. It ain't going to happen. 2007. I appreciate that, Dean, bringing that up. I was talking about the big game for Missouri then. But so sneaky good game here. Curious to see how Missouri handles it.
Yeah, and I think also too, and I've talked a lot about the whirlwind and roller coaster ride of a season. Last week was the biggest game of the season for Missouri. Out of conference, Kansas State at home had a chance to kind of change its trajectory. Okay, well, now this game is the biggest game of the season for Missouri versus Memphis. I'm fired up. It's in St. Louis, y'all. I was actually just in St. Louis in June for a Cardinals game. I think the best way to describe St. Louis is kind of its best days are behind them as a city, but overall they're rabid sports fans, and we've seen the XFL. The XFL has played a couple games and that abandoned Rams place, and they pack it out. And so I think this will be a really fun game for the city as well as both fan bases. But when it comes to the two teams, like I said, now this is the biggest game of the year for Missouri. And you said it, Blake, all the momentum they just had, last week beating Kansas State at home is gone if they find a way to lose this game against Memphis and, find their way hobbling into the Vandy game and LSU game. So, they need to establish themselves. Do we have an update with Brady Cook's injury? I know he's a little banged up.
Yes. I texted my good buddy Gabe DeArmond, who covers Missouri for PowerMizzou.com. He texted me back right about the time we were starting this show saying he expects Cook to play. I think seems like there's a pretty big drop off from him to Horn, at least in terms of coaching staff trust. Yeah. So watch. I think this guy is this. Let's see. Vegas has got 54.5 points on the over-under. That feels a little high. Memphis, I'm going to read you some defensive stats for Memphis before we move on to the next thing.
Sam's comment. St. Louis beat the 19. My goodness, Sam.
I try to be nice about it. That's what I meant. That's what I was trying to say.
Well, they did lose an NFL team, so there was that. Yeah, that's never good. We've upset Oreo. Missouri is a 6.5 point favorite, according to the last thing I know on the spread, 54.5 point over under. That makes a final of 31-24 Missouri. That seems a little high. My goodness, he's losing his mind in there. Missouri -6 according to FPI, -5 according to SP Plus, -5 according to Sagard. So everybody's got it at 5 to 6 point range. Now, Memphis hasn't played much of anybody yet, but the defensive numbers have been elite. 4.8 yards against rushing plays, 3.0 against passing plays. That's unheard of. Memphis forcing turnovers on about 4% of snaps. Missouri's going to have to run the ball and be careful. That seems like the way to attack Memphis. And I think that Missouri will do that and take care of business, but I think it's going to be a low-scoring, close game is my expectation, especially if Cook is not 100%.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I'm going to pick Missouri just because, again, I want to try to keep my 5-0 bowl prediction alive here. But, yeah, I mean, what Blake Watson had a big game against Navy. You kind of look at the way this Memphis team sets up here, and they know. I mean, all the pressure's on Missouri in this one, coming off that big win against Kansas State. And like you said, Chris, this line is down to 6 in some places, seems to be moving down more. And so, yeah, this is one of those. I think if you're a Missouri fan, and I know we have somebody like you're nervous. I think about this one. I think you have every right to be, because you know how that felt last week, and now you're thinking of what it could feel like if you lose this game this week, and that opportunity that's there. And we've seen some programs try to take that next step in the SEC before, that win one of those big games, and all of a sudden they turn around and lose a game they shouldn't, and then you kind of reset. And I hope that doesn't happen for Missouri, and I'm going to pick them to win. But I just tend to think with Cook's injury and those things coming into play here, this is going to be one that maybe comes down to the wire.
Yeah, I think
Gavin.
I think you're a little nervous as a Missouri fan. I think that's warranted. At the same time, this game's going to come down to is if Missouri can sustain the explosive plays that they were able to create against Kansas State. That's something we haven't seen them be able to do in previous weeks. Luther Burden over the top of a safety, Luther Burden on a screen. There's other guys on the offense as well, but you got to get the ball in Three's hands. The guy's an absolute dynamic player. And so, can they continue to do that? I got Missouri as well. I think they're going to win anywhere between 3 and 6. I think it will be tight. Neutral site game in the middle of the year. You don't see that a lot. Usually it's at the beginning. But I think it'll be a fun atmosphere, fun time in St. Louis. I'm telling you, those fans are rabid football fans. If they show up for an XFL game, I promise you they'll show up for college football.